My name is Chelsea and I'm 32 years old. The family reunion was supposed to be a happy one. My mother had rented the lake house for the weekend, the same one we'd gone to every summer since I was a kid, and for once, everyone showed up. My sister Margaret, her husband Trent, my cousins, even my uncle who never comes to anything. There were string lights wrapped around the porch railing, and someone had grilled too much corn, and for a few hours, I let myself believe we were just a normal, happy family. I left around 9 that night because I had an early shift at the clinic the next morning. I hugged my mother goodbye, told Margaret I'd call her during the week, and drove the 40 minutes back to my apartment with the windows down, feeling lighter than I had in months. That feeling didn't last. I got home, kicked off my shoes, and opened my banking app out of habit, the way you check your phone before bed without really thinking about it. The number on the screen didn't make sense at first. I blinked at it, refreshed the app, thinking it had to be a glitch. My checking account, the one I'd been building for 2 years to put a down payment on a house, the one that had $41,000 in it that morning, showed a balance of $312. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time before I could even process what I was looking at. I scrolled through the transaction history with my hands shaking, and there it was, a single wire transfer made that afternoon, while I was at the lake house eating grilled corn and believing in family. The transfer had gone to an account under the name Trent Wakeman, my brother-in-law. I didn't sleep that night. I called the bank's emergency line at 2 in the morning and sat on hold for 40 minutes, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The woman on the phone was kind but firm. She told me that because the transfer had been authorized through an old joint access link from years back, one Margaret and I had set up when we shared a phone plan and I'd forgotten to remove, it wouldn't be flagged as fraud automatically. I would need to file a police report myself if I wanted it investigated as theft. I drove to my sister's house the next morning before my shift, still in yesterday's clothes, my eyes raw from crying. Margaret opened the door looking annoyed, like I was interrupting something. When I told her what happened, she didn't even flinch. She just turned and called for Trent. He came down the stairs in sweatpants, holding a cup of coffee like nothing in the world was wrong. I asked him straight out if he had taken money from my account. He didn't deny it. He didn't even pretend to be sorry. He just shrugged, took a sip of his coffee, and said it like I was the unreasonable one in the room. We needed it more than you did, Chelsea. You don't even have kids. I stood there in their kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd brought soup when Margaret had the flu, where I'd helped paint the walls the summer they moved in, and I felt something inside me go very cold and very still. My hands were trembling, but my voice wasn't, not anymore. I reached down and picked up my bag off the counter, the one with my wallet and my keys, and I looked him dead in the eye. Then you won't mind what's coming next. Trent laughed. Margaret laughed too. This short, ugly little laugh like I just told a bad joke at a dinner party. What are you going to do, Chelsea? Cry about it, Trent said, setting his mug down hard enough that coffee splashed onto the counter. It's family money. Get over it. I didn't say another word. I turned and walked out of that house with my chest burning and my eyes stinging, but I didn't cry, not in front of them. I sat in my car in their driveway for almost 10 minutes before I could make my hands steady enough to drive, and by the time I got to the police station, I think some part of me already knew this wasn't going to end quietly. I filed the report that same afternoon, gave them every detail, the bank records, the transfer confirmation, the screenshots of his name on the receiving account. The officer taking my statement told me theft between family members was still theft under the law, and that they'd be in touch within the week. I didn't expect it to happen that fast. I didn't expect 3 days later to be standing back in that same kitchen, my mother on one side of me calling me selfish for tearing the family apart, Margaret screaming that I'd ruined everything, Trent leaning against the counter with that same smug look on his face, certain that nothing was actually going to happen to him. And that's exactly when it did. A loud bang shook the house, hard enough to rattle the dishes in the cabinet. Every head in that kitchen turned at once. The front door flew open, and standing there, weapons drawn, were 2 uniformed officers and a detective I recognized from the station. The detective stepped through the doorway first, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Trent. "Trent Wakeman," he said, and it wasn't really a question. My mother gasped and grabbed the edge of the counter. Margaret's face went white. Trent set his coffee mug down so hard it cracked, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked genuinely afraid. "You're under arrest for theft by deception and unauthorized electronic transfer," the detective said, already reaching for the handcuffs at his belt. One of the officers moved to read him his rights while the other kept a hand near his radio, watching the room the way you watch a situation that could go sideways fast. My mother started crying, not for me, but for him, begging the officers to give him a chance, to let the family talk it out. Margaret was screaming that I had done this, that I had called the police on her own husband, that I had no idea what I'd just destroyed. I stood near the doorway, my arms wrapped around myself, watching a man I had once trusted enough to invite into my family get walked out of that kitchen in handcuffs. He didn't look at me on his way out. He looked at the floor. The detective stayed behind for a few minutes after the squad car pulled away, and that's when things took a turn I hadn't expected. He asked if we could speak privately, and I followed him out to the porch. He told me that once they'd pulled Trent's financial records to process my report, they'd found something else, something that had nothing to do with me at all. Trent had been quietly moving money out of his own mother's retirement account for almost a year, small amounts at first, then larger ones, using the same kind of old shared access loophole he'd used on me. She hadn't noticed because she rarely checked her statements, and Trent had been counting on exactly that. I felt the ground tilt a little under me. All this time, I had thought I was the only one. The detective said the investigation was widening, that there might be more victims they hadn't even identified yet, and that my report had been the thread that unraveled the whole thing. He thanked me for coming forward, told me plainly that if I hadn't filed it, there was a good chance Trent would have kept doing this to someone else, maybe someone who couldn't afford to lose anything at all. When I walked back inside, the kitchen was a different kind of chaos. My mother was sitting at the table with her face in her hands. Margaret was on the phone, her voice cracking as she tried to reach a lawyer. Nobody was calling me selfish anymore. My mother looked up at me, her eyes red, and said my name like she didn't know what else to say after it. I didn't sit down. I told her, as gently as I could manage with my chest still pounding, that I hadn't done this to hurt anyone. I had done it because nobody else was going to protect me, and apparently, nobody else had been protecting his own mother either. It took almost 4 months for everything to play out. Trent was charged on multiple counts, mine included, and the financial records the detectives pulled painted a much bigger picture than any of us had wanted to see. He'd been doing this in small, careful ways for years, always to people who loved him enough not to look too closely. The court ordered restitution, and slowly, piece by piece, my $41,000 started coming back to me, though the version of my family that existed before that day never did. Margaret and I don't talk much anymore. She still believes, somewhere underneath all of it, that I betrayed her by going to the police instead of handling it privately. But I've stopped needing her to understand it the way I need to understand it myself. I worked for that money alone. Late shifts, double shifts, years of saying no to vacations and yes to overtime, and I wasn't willing to let anyone, family or not, decide it belonged to them more than it belonged to me. My mother and I are slowly rebuilding something. Carefully, the way you rebuild anything that's been cracked all the way through. She apologized to me eventually, quietly, in a way that didn't erase what she'd said that day, but at least acknowledged it. I don't know if Trent will ever feel sorry for what he did. People like that rarely do. But I know I'm not the same woman who walked out of that kitchen trembling, afraid to stand up for herself. I learned that protecting yourself isn't selfish, even when the people who are supposed to love you try to convince you that it is. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been made to feel guilty for simply standing up for yourself, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button before you go. There are so many more stories like mine waiting for you on this channel. Real moments of betrayal, justice, and the strength it takes to finally say enough. Subscribe now, because you won't want to miss what's coming next.